I remember the day as if it were yesterday. It was a typical evening, and I had just finished my shift. I worked for a high-profile cleaning company that specialized in taking care of the homes of celebrities and rich people in the area. Usually, we worked in pairs or small groups of 3. The routine was hectic but pretty straightforward. On this particular day, I thought my shift was finally over. It was about 7 p.m. and I was packing up my stuff, ready to clock out when my boss called me to her office to inform me that there was a cleaning job that needed immediate attention. She explained that one of our colleagues had a sudden medical emergency, leaving her partner Lucy without assistance, and she needed me to replace her. We worked mostly in the daytime. Night shifts were occasional. Going for impromptu cleaning jobs like this happened from time to time. Today was one of them. My boss was not the most understanding person, and I was not prepared to lose my job. So I reluctantly agreed. Moments later, Lucy and I were on our way to the client's house. We arrived there, and it turned out to be the house of a well-known politician. The place was massive, surrounded by high walls, and looked like it was straight out of an ancient novel. It was nothing like I had ever seen. Apparently, the politician's son had thrown a little party, and we were there to clean up. We got out of the car, grabbed our cleaning equipment, and headed to the front door. A doorman with a really stern face met us at the door. As soon as we stepped in, he immediately locked the door with keys. I turned to look at Lucy with a puzzled face, but she was scribbling something on a piece of paper and did not notice anything. Lucy had been to the politician's house numerous times before, so she explained the routine and handed me a checklist of tasks to complete. She asked that we split up and clean separately to work faster. I nodded and set out to work, eager to finish up and head home as I was beginning to feel really creeped out. I began by cleaning up the litter, picking up empty cups and plates into a trash bag. About an hour later, I began to feel really uncomfortable. The doorman kept lurking around, and it seemed like he was observing me. I reached into my pocket for the checklist Lucy had given me. I had 3 more rooms to clean. The game room upstairs was next. I picked up the cleaning cart and headed up the stairs. The mansion was enormous, filled with numerous rooms, and after minutes of rolling my cart, trying to find the game room, I realized I was lost. Confused, I tried retracing my steps, but the corridors seemed to twist and turn in ways I couldn't comprehend. I looked to see if I could find the creepy doorman to ask for directions, but he was nowhere to be found. Frustrated, I began opening every single door, trying to find the game room, each more opulent than the last. I stumbled upon a door that seemed way smaller than the rest. I opened it and peeked my head into the dark room. With some illumination from the hallway light, I was able to tell that it was an almost empty storage room. I was about to shut the door when I heard a soft whimpering sound. It was an odd noise, like that of a child crying. Startled, I paused, doubting my senses. And then, I heard it again. Soft, whimpering sounds. My curiosity got the better of me. I picked up my flashlight, determined to have a better look at what was inside the storage room. In the corner, I spotted the shadow of 2 small figures huddled on the floor. Frozen in shock, I barely had time to process what I was looking at before the deep voice of the doorman interrupted my thoughts. "Were you not explicitly told to stay away from this area?" His words sent shivers down my spine. Unsure of what to say, I mumbled an apology and explained that I had lost my way. The doorman stared at me and told me I had to leave. The next day, my boss summoned me to her office, and without much explanation, I was fired. It is pretty obvious what I was being fired for. I knew I had to bring attention to what I had witnessed in that mansion. I dialed 911 and was met with the most disinterested operator I had ever spoken to. Despite my narration of the events, she remained silent, occasionally yawning. She informed me that the police would investigate and hung up. Several years passed, and one afternoon in my living room, my wife drew my attention to a breaking news story on TV. 2 young women, aged 21 and 23, had been rescued from a mansion in Nob Hill, owned by a well-known politician. I stared at the screen with my mouth wide open as the news unfolded. The mansion on the screen was the very same I had cleaned years ago. The 2 girls were the shadow figures I had seen in that dark storage room. It turned out they were the politician's orphaned nieces. He had hidden and abused them for years. I still can't shake the feeling that I had failed those girls by not persisting with the police. I used to work for a marketing agency in Seattle. My job was mainly crunching numbers and drowning in spreadsheets. It was your typical 9-to-5 grind, but with the end-of-year hustle, some of us had to pull extra hours. My boss dropped yet another urgent project on my desk, and I had to stay late to get it done. The office was deserted. The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning. I found myself working alone in the empty office building after everyone had called it a day. So there I was, 10 p.m., buried in my work, crunching numbers and drowning in coffee, when I saw a person hurrying down the hall. The person zoomed by so fast that I could not make out who it was, but I was certain it was a man. It wasn't uncommon for people to stay late during this period, but I had been to the break room twice to get coffee, and I could have sworn I was the only one on the floor. I decided not to get distracted and concluded that maybe someone else was on the floor, and I hadn't noticed. A few minutes later, I hear the elevator chime. I looked up from my computer, expecting to see someone, but no one passed by. My office was located at a spot where anyone who came through the elevator had to pass by to get to any room on the floor. I called out a couple of times, and no one answered. I was beginning to get really agitated, so I grabbed my coat to get more coffee in the break room. On my way to the break room, a man wearing a dark hoodie appeared out of nowhere. I was startled and let out a scream. The man dropped his hoodie and revealed his face. It was Jackson, the office sweetheart, always surrounded by admirers but rarely seen doing any actual work. I had never seen him stay past 5 p.m. in the 2 years I've known him. He looked at me, gave a half smile, and walked over to the break room door. He stood in front of the door as if he was trying to prevent me from going in. I asked him what was going on, and he simply said nothing was going on. Now, Jackson was a married man, but there were rumors he was having an affair with a colleague, Lisa. Everyone in the office was pretty aware of the fact, but nobody ever said anything. I looked at Jackson still blocking the door and noticed how different he looked, panic-stricken and out of place, as if he had seen a ghost. I could sense something was off, so I reluctantly got back to my desk without my coffee. I went back to work, trying hard to concentrate, and after 20 minutes of trying to focus, decided I had to go home. I quickly saved up my work, packed my things, and made my way to the elevator. As fate would have it, we ended up riding the elevator together. The elevator dinged, and we both stepped in. I expected the usual elevator silence, but I could not stop myself from asking if everything was okay. He nodded, and that was when I noticed him trying to cover what looked like a red stain on his pants. He sensed my suspicion and immediately grabbed my arm and said, "Just walk over to your car and do not look back." When we descended to the parking lot, he let go of my arm, and I shakily walked over to my car. I saw Jackson's SUV parked with the trunk open and items all over the floor. I looked back and saw Jackson still standing by the elevator. He stood with his legs apart and his fists clenched as if he was ready to attack me. He walked over to his car and quickly shut the trunk, but not before I had seen a red suitcase in it. I picked up my pace and ran to my car. Once inside, I locked the doors and drove out of the parking lot, almost hitting a pavement on the way out. The following day, neither Lisa nor Jackson showed up to work. I told my boss what happened the previous night, and he called the police. Jackson was apprehended at the airport 6 weeks later while trying to flee the country. It turned out Lisa had tried to blackmail him with a video of them together. He killed her, stuffed her in a suitcase, drove to the office to retrieve the flash drive containing the video. Till date, neither Lisa nor the suitcase was ever found. I still can't believe I rode the elevator alone with a man who had just killed. As a police officer, I have seen my fair share of weird and tragic stuff, but this encounter was one of the most troubling of my experiences. This happened over 10 years ago when I had just been transferred to a new town after a nasty divorce with my ex-wife. It was a Friday night, and I was on my graveyard shift. I drove around patrolling the area as I would normally do. I was always on the lookout for DUIs, especially during the weekends. This particular night was a slow one, and after driving around for about 2 hours, I decided to park my car and take a break. A few moments later, I got a dispatch call on the radio about a woman in distress being held against her will. The address was just a few blocks away, so I decided to take the call. I knew it was a case of domestic violence, but it was not uncommon to have such calls every week. A few minutes later, I arrived first at the scene and parked a bit away. I did a quick sweep of the area. As I stepped out, the sound of 2 gunshots echoed through the air. I immediately radioed for backup, drew my gun, and began to approach the house, my heart pounding loudly in my chest. Dogs began to bark as the neighbors' lights turned on one after the other. The house in front of me was pitch black, except for the dim glow in the living room. The door was slightly open, and broken glass covered the floor. Knowing backup was minutes away, I turned on my flashlight and slid in through the door. I scanned the living room, and there was no one. Just as I was starting to make my way upstairs, an old guy with a rifle appeared. I immediately recognized him as Mr. Douglas. He was a very friendly old man who hung around the station often. He grunted, saying the intruder bolted out back. I asked him about the woman in distress, but he acted like I was speaking some alien language. Without wasting a moment, I sprinted to the back in pursuit of the intruder. With my flashlight in hand, I scanned the overgrown grass for any sign of a person. Dogs barked in the distance, but I couldn't find a soul. I rushed back into the house, calling out for the old man, but there was only silence. Panic set in as I made my way upstairs to what seemed like the bedroom. The house was eerily quiet, and my senses were on high alert. No signs of any woman, and my flashlight flickered off just as I approached the wide-open door. Stumbling back, I cursed myself for not changing the batteries sooner. A couple of smacks later, the flashlight came back on. I breathed a sigh of relief and stepped into the dark bedroom looking for the light switch. I scanned the room, still calling out for the old man, but there was no response. I turned to leave when, out of nowhere, I heard a gun cock behind me. The old man stood by the door, rifle in hand. "Calm down, sir. It's me, the police officer, Sergeant Wesley Schofield. We spoke earlier," I said. He told me to not move an inch. Shock paralyzed me as he cocked the gun again, advancing menacingly. I had my weapon drawn, but it was pointed away, useless against the rifle aimed at me. Everything froze, and I saw my life flash before my eyes. Several minutes had passed, and my backup hadn't arrived. Something wasn't right. The old man was in his late 70s and blind in one eye, and I wondered if he was having an episode and forgot who I was. Maybe he couldn't see my police uniform, I had thought. I offered to show him my badge if he lowered his rifle, but he did not budge. As I had failed to de-escalate the situation, I informed him that backup was on the way, and that he shouldn't try anything he would regret. He laughed and told me backup should have arrived minutes ago, and that there was no one coming. "It's just you and me," he said. He continued to talk about his son being shot by a cop and that he could kill me and no one would know the truth. As the old man spat out those chilling words, the distant wail of police sirens reached my ears. I had never felt so relieved in my life. Backup had finally arrived. There was no woman in distress in that house. I had driven to the wrong address and interrupted a burglary attempt instead. During interrogation, the old man denied ever threatening to shoot me. He claimed he was half blind and scared and mistook me for the intruder. It was his word against mine. I did some research and found out that his son was killed by a cop during a traffic stop 3 years ago. I wonder what would have happened if the cops hadn't shown up at the time they did.